it's not just us and Coral Vita that's successful and thriving, but there's been this roadmap for 1,000 other Coral Vitas and terrestrial and other marine ecosystems too, that people are putting money into this. We're investing in the ecosystems, in the local communities. It's showed that this is it's a win-win-win, because it is. I mean, again, if you can restore a reef that's a living seawall that protects your roads and homes from storms, it's also a tourism asset and boosts fish populations and is cheaper than the alternative, it's like, kind of why not? And, maybe we're also doing mangrove restoration and seagrass restoration, and the tech is just doing all sorts of amazing things, and we can bring in roboticists and all other, forms of people from across the spectrum, where it's not just the marine scientists and, people who care and do good and love the reefs, but we're bringing in, coders and software engineers and, AI specialists and, systems thinkers, and really creating this thriving system and restoration economy that takes care of the ecosystems that take care of us.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ignite podcast. Today, we're thrilled to have Sam Teicher on the mic. He is co-founder and chief reef officer at Coral Vita, a mission-driven company growing climate-resilient corals and restoring dying reefs at scale. Sam's journey spans early scuba diving, policy work at the White House, and launching a for-profit restoration model out of Yale. Thanks for coming on, Sam.
Thanks so much for having me, Brian. Appreciate it.
Well, I'd love to start with your origin story. What's your background?
There's a lot of ways I could answer that, but I guess as it relates to the work I'm doing with coral reef restoration, the first time I saw a coral reef, I was 6 years old. So that's one of my happiest, earliest memories, just being in sort of this lava rock lagoon on the island of Hawaii, the big island, and just seeing all these different shapes and colors and just being totally mesmerized by it. Didn't think I was going to grow up and become a coral farmer from the famous tropical waters of the Potomac River in Washington, D.C. But I always loved nature. I'd roll over logs in my parents' backyard and look at bugs, go hiking in the Shenandoahs or fishing in the Chesapeake Bay. And I also was always sort of drawn towards fixing problems. So my parents sort of instilled in me and my brother this belief about being able to just fix problems if we saw or felt the need to. My dad worked on making peace in the Middle East before I was born. Unfortunately, wasn't as successful as we all would have liked, but he was working at the highest levels of policy on that.
Many have tried.
He gave it the old college try for sure.
That's right.
I went to DC public schools. I was interested in education reform. I was interested in peacemaking and international security. I was interested in just, these big problems. And then in college, I studied political science. I'll go on the record and say I don't have a marine science background. I have much smarter people than me on our team at Coral Vita doing the good work. But I was always sort of, connecting the dots and was looking at climate change and the destruction of nature as this thing where ultimately, in addition, just again, that deep love for nature, if you're concerned about economic prosperity, refugees, public health, any of those things, if you're concerned about public health, if you're concerned about national security and refugees, any of these things, in addition, just the magic and the wonder and inspiration of the environment, as it dies, as it degrades, it impacts all. It is an existential crisis, but it's one that really ultimately affects humanity. And there's sort of this aha moment for me in college. And so I concentrated my studies in that space. I got into grad school, the Yale School of the Environment, took a gap year, went to go work for my friend's NGO, Eli Africa in Mauritius, where I helped set up the environmental branch and ended up getting a grant from the United Nations to do a traditional coral farming project, setting up a sort of an underwater garden. It was a magical experience, saw a reef come back to life, working with local communities, and also saw that from a scaling perspective, from a ecological perspective, and from a funding perspective, grants and donations are not going to cut it. What if we could come up with a new model to scale impact better? Met my co-founder, Gator Halpern, in our master's program. He felt he was writing the obituary for the planet from an academic perspective. I had the NGO frustrations as well as working at the White House and for a coalition of island nation governments, knowing what's possible and needed in that world, but also the limits of bureaucratic inertia. We got a $1,000 grant from school to test out a business idea over a decade ago for a coral restoration company, and we've been going ever since.
It's amazing. Wow. And so it's kind of social entrepreneurship, triple bottom line kind of stuff, but it's not just like, hey, donate to us so we can save the reefs. It's like, no, we can actually create a business around this. There's lots of resorts and governments and people who care about this that will actually pay for like restoration as a service.
That's the thesis. Yeah. Is instead of that grant from the UN, which I'm still grateful for, but let me tell you, it was not an easy process and wasn't for a lot of money. And that didn't get renewed. And that was the end of the project, right? It let us grow 5,000 corals once in the island, Asia and Mauritius. And that one country alone needs closer to maybe 5 million corals a year. So that traditional approach, just it really doesn't cut it. So if you take a step back from the magic and the wonder of coral reefs, they're one of the most valuable and important ecosystems on the planet. It's estimated that they generate $2.7 trillion every year. They power tourism economies. They act like seawalls and protect coastlines from storms. There are medicines on the market fighting cancer to viral infections to arthritis that derive from organisms living on the reefs. So you've got then 1 billion people in about 100 countries and territories, and a quarter of all marine life that depends on this one ecosystem. Half of coral reefs have died since the 1970s. We're on track to lose over 90% by 2050. So basically in 80 years, an average human lifespan, we can lose one of the most incredible ecosystems. And then with that true tragedy, that's a lot of value. That's a lot of lives. That's a lot that's on the line. And so our thinking was, yes, if we can get the hotels, governments, developers, insurance companies, everyone who depends on the benefits the reefs provide and is at risk from those reefs dying can hire a company like Coral Vita to restore the reefs they depend on, then we can sort of create this revenue-based model to fund the millions and ultimately billions of corals we need to keep reefs alive for the future.
So how does it work? What is the cost? I'm a hotel, sitting somewhere where there's a reef deteriorating, and I'd like to see the reef come back. And my wife and I just got back from Bora Bora for our 20th, and they had at the Conrad, they had a bunch of restoration. You could go snorkel through them, and they had this one geodesic dome structure underneath with I guess electrical current was flowing through it, trying to stimulate reef growth and stuff. I'm sure you're familiar with this, but so like a hotel would approach you and say, okay, yeah, we'd like to get the reef going here. Like how much are they usually willing to pay? And what does it cost like per acre? How do you price it and stuff?
Well, we work in the marine world, it's per hectare, about like 2.2 acres. And everyone's favorite answer, it depends. The cost of doing the work in Indonesia would be different than the Bahamas, would be different than Saudi Arabia. But as a general rule of thumb, about $350,000 to restore a hectare of reef. And that might seem like a lot of money, but if you then put that in the perspective of a hotel, the annual cost for landscaping or for resurfacing the pool deck, and here you've got a asset that is drawing in high-paying tourists.
Yeah, I want to snorkel. I want to see colors. I want to see fish. And it's really sad. I mean, I've lived in the Caribbean and Hawaii. Hawaii has, some of the most deteriorated, especially off Oahu, right?
Yeah.
You kind of go snorkeling off Oahu and you're like, this is really sad. Especially compared to some of the places I've been snorkeling in the Caribbean. Back when I was 20 years ago, in my 20s, I used to take people around the Caribbean on a kind of like a boozy kind of cruise, but it was a snorkeling cruise, and I'd guide them through like snorkeling trips and stuff. So I'm very familiar with, what a good reef looks like and what a bad reef looks like. And I can imagine to a hotel, especially one in Bora Bora or something, you want to have the best looking reef possible for your guests.
People are spending a lot of time on that plane. They're spending a lot of money on the hotel. And yeah, even if they're not, a coral nerd and super attuned with all the life that's out there, if they still just want to see pretty fish, they want to see turtles. If there's no reef,
there's no life.
Corals, there's no life. It's like if you cut down all the trees in the forest, then there's not going to be the deer, there's not going to be the birds.
Why go to the mountains after the forest burns down?
So you're hitting the nail right on the head, and love that you've got this experience and background and love. So hopefully we'll get you out and plant some corals with us down at some of our farms. One of our investors actually is this guy Tom Cheese, one of the co-founders of Google X. And he's through us, but actually through other initiatives too. He's doing a lot of work in the coral restoration space. And that actually was also from seeing the corals near his home in Hawaii die and deteriorate and thinking he's got to do something about this. So
I'm sure my sister would love to talk to you guys. She works in San Diego diving. Oh, cool. She's a diver. So she dives like every day, 5-6 days a week. And they're doing all kinds of restoration projects down there in SoCal. I'm like counting and planting seaweed and removing invasive seaweed and all the above, right?
Invasive urchins and kelp. Yeah, and Gator, my co-founder, is actually a proud San Diegan. So yeah, we'll definitely have to get up with your sister.
Yeah, that's really cool. All right, so like, how much hectares does an average hotel need? One would probably do it, and you can kind of line the shore, basically.
Yeah, and you could go down or up. You could do a quarter hectare. You could do 5. It does depend on the hotel and what the local needs are. How much degradation is it at 5 feet? Is it at 30 feet? But another sort of element of it, there's the tourism angle. I briefly touched on also earlier, coastal protection. So there actually are now coral restoration insurance policies on the market that have had payouts because a healthy reef on average reduces wave energy by 97%.
Oh,
So instead of have to spend hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of building an ugly gray concrete or rock seawall, which is
right. Like in Waikiki, this is one of the eyesores now in Waikiki. They had to build those retaining walls to hold the sand in and stop the waves coming in, make it friendly for swimmers.
Reefs do that naturally. They don't cost anything, and they're basically living seawalls, and they can regenerate over time. Now, obviously, we're losing them, and we'll talk more about how we're growing more resilient corals to sort of face that. But DARPA, the R&D arm of the U.S. military, had a project called Reefence. I love when the military uses puns, but it was looking at how coral and oyster restoration is a more effective and cost-effective means to protect naval bases from erosion and storm surge than concrete seawalls. And I think it's fair to say that the insurance and industry and the military aren't your progressive environmentalists, but they are in the business of mitigating risk. And the studies were done that if the oyster reefs off of New Jersey and New York were healthy like they once were when Superstorm Sandy came through, $1 billion of damages would have been averted. I was living in Grand Bahama where we launched our first farm when Hurricane Dorian came through, one of the strongest storms ever. And mangrove forests, similar role, in addition to all the other benefits they provide, save people's lives. People we were sort of doing rescue and relief work with credited the mangrove forest that surrounded their island with saving them. And so those hotels or governments or whoever else, in addition to that tourism benefit, also can say, oh, maybe I can have my premiums reduced. Or I know that if I buy into this proactively now, there could be a immediate payout from a sort of a trust to restore those reefs so they don't degrade over time. So again, from a pure bottom line and dollars and cents perspective, it's so in the interest of hotels and all these other players to protect these ultimately natural assets.
So I'm going to put my VC hat on for a second. Well, how do you think about the size of the market? You said it's a $2 trillion market earlier. That was like a top-down kind of all economic activity. If you went and restored all the reefs in the world, how many hectares of reefs do we need at 350,000?
Answer: we're talking about a $100 billion opportunity. Now, that's not an annually recurring market.
Right.
That's just $100 billion. But I think we can feel good about that. And
yeah.
I can talk the math on that. But basically, the U.S. government, believe it or not, historically and still even today, have actually been pretty proactive in the coral restoration space. And it actually is one of the few things that still has bipartisan support. And the folks at NOAA who are leading that space really often set 5% of a reef as a target for restoration, right? You don't need to cover all the 100% of that hectare with corals if you do it the right way.
The forest, you don't have to plant every single tree.
Exactly.
Because the trees will beget more trees, right?
So I'm talking to the right guy here. This is easy conversation. So if you basically take 5% across all the world's reefs and then multiply that by, $350,000 per hectare, you get around $100 billion.
Wow, amazing.
And that's a lot of money. And at the same time, it's not that much for what we're talking about. And you can sort of put it at the pure $2.7 trillion a year. But if you think about a world without coral reefs, you're thinking about, again, people can't feed their families, they can't pay the bills, their homes are underwater. The person in your life who's got cancer can't get their treatment anymore because the source of the medicine is gone. You're not able to enjoy your vacations or have a seafood dinner on your plate. However small or big, $100 billion to ensure that we have this incredible and incredibly important asset. We got the money to do this.
Right.
And we have the skill and the technology and the communities who can make it happen.
And the demand. So how many hectares have you restored and how long does it take to fully restore?
So one of the exciting things that we do, so we grow our corals in land-based farms. When I lived in Mauritius, I had this sort of underwater garden project, and that's how it's usually done. It's a lovely day at the office. It's probably what you were seeing a lot of in Bora Bora. There's a lot of limitations when it comes to those nurseries. Setting up and maintaining one at every reef that needs to be restored isn't practical. You can't
you can kind of do it in a centralized kind of warehouse
with
center.
Our model with the land-based farms. You can have like an aquaculture park and supply entire regions reefs with these corals instead of having to do the work everywhere. And also, if you can walk right up to the tanks to do the work as opposed to having to put on a scuba
dive
suit,
and
go out on a boat and the weather's not good, we can't go out there, or there's a storm and the whole thing's jeopardized, or there's a spike in temperatures and the corals in your nursery in the ocean could die. So we have higher degrees of control. We're also able to use these methods to accelerate coral growth. So there's an open source form of science called micro-fragmenting. And to just do a little coral 101 for the listeners, a coral is actually an animal that has plants living inside of it that makes rock for its skeleton, which for me is a pretty cool 3-for-1. They're ancient distant cousins of jellyfish. They just decided to stop moving. So if you look at one piece of coral, a coral colony, it's actually hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of coral polyps, and they're each clones of one another, they're genetic copies. So it was discovered if you take one piece of coral, you cut it up into these tiny little pieces, these micro-fragments, you put them near each other, it triggers a natural healing process, and they'll fuse back into themselves, almost like scar tissue. So we'll cut these corals, fuse them back together, cut them up, fuse them back together, because while some corals naturally grow fast, the branching corals, they look like deer's antlers. You take a cutting the size of your thumb, 6 to 12 months later, it's the size of your hand and wrist. That's typically what's grown in the ocean-based nurseries, but the bouldering corals, the encrusting species and platings, these big, massive ones, they could take decades or centuries to reach the same size. We now are growing them in months and years instead of decades and centuries. So typically we'll grow the corals for about 6 to 12, maybe up to 24 months. And then we'll go down with underwater drills and cement or marine epoxy glue, and we'll plug them in. So you can see that reef come back to life pretty quickly. And obviously it'll be a few more years before you're thinking like it's a Nat Geo level reef, but almost overnight, it's sort of if you plant it, they will come. We've seen massive upticks in fish populations practically overnight. You're giving fish that structure, homes, ways to hide from predators. And so, twofold increases in fish life populations at some of our sites. And then another thing we didn't really touch on also is we often get asked, what's the point? Right? Corals are dying. And we're not creating super corals that are going to survive anything. If there's still pollution being dumped in there, we can't do restoration in that area. But one of the key things that's killing corals is warming temperatures. Just like if we get sick.
And the acidification of the ocean, right? Which is part of the warming, but also part of the pollution.
Exactly. There's the absorption of carbon dioxide is changing the water chemistry as the temperature goes up. And so just like if we get a fever, we get sick, and then serious things can happen. If it gets too hot for the corals, they also struggle and often can die. And with the land-based farms, we're incorporating elements of this field of science called assisted evolution, where basically the best analogy I can give is we can give corals the spa treatment, or we can take them to the gym. So we can make it from a temperature, a salinity, a pH perspective, just the way they like it to grow fast or to reproduce. Corals make babies. Or we can stress test the corals. We can mimic future ocean temperatures, raise them, identify which genotypes are naturally more resilient, crossbreed them together so that when we outplant those corals, they can better survive. And we're talking right now in December 2025, our team just did surveys of corals we planted for a project in Dubai. The Arabian Sea is hot. There's a lot of sedimentation, a lot of coastal construction that's damaged reefs there. It had near record heat temperatures this summer. And I will be frank and say I didn't have the highest expectations for how our corals done because of all these factors. We planted corals in December 24 and May 25. 2 of our corals were dead. I'm not going to guarantee that every time, but knowing that level of resilience there or from other projects we've done in the Bahamas or elsewhere, seeing those corals survive when things get tough is super encouraging. So more diverse, more resilient, and then more affordable corals at scale for the people.
Well, just like a farmer would adapt their crops. If you went from, say, Europe to America or vice versa, you took New World back to Old World, you could adopt the crops over time through breeding techniques. That's basically what you guys are doing. You're breeding these these corals that are much more resilient.
Yeah, and it's worth noting we are always using native corals. So if we're in the Bahamas, we're using Bahamian corals. There are very respectable scientists talking about, well, do we need these super heat tolerant corals from the Red Sea in Australia and the Great Barrier Reef? If that happens, then we'll get involved in that. We're not pushing that kind of stuff forward, but we're also at the level of how bad things are that those scientists who would have chased you out of the room with pitchforks for suggesting something like that a few years ago are now really having to contemplate pretty next level stuff. But yeah, we're basically using selective breeding and toughening up these corals so that they can better survive.
Remember my genetics 101, the pea pods and all that stuff. That's about the level of my science education. It's like 100 level biology in college.
Linnaeus.
Yeah. And then is there, kind of genetic engineering on the horizon? Would you actually start kind of modifying the DNA of the coral to be even more resilient, or is that even necessary?
So that research is being done. There's some pretty heady stuff in the lab. There is CRISPR gene editing for corals to promote heat tolerance or disease tolerance or faster growth. There are people looking at how maybe you can sort of create these huge underwater pipes to bring colder water upwelling to reef areas when it gets really hot, deploying these
coral air conditioning.
Yeah.
Water conditioning, basically.
I recently became a dad, so I'm here for the dad jokes.
Oh, it just gets better. I have 3 kids, so my oldest is 15, so I've had 15 years of dad jokes.
It's well seasoned. Biodegradable reflective slicks that can be deployed on top of the water to reflect sunlight. Again, from our perspective at Coral Vita, we're not touching those yet. Maybe it's the way of the future, but we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what unintended consequences there may be. So what's exciting is that if it seems, oh yeah, you know what, CRISPR, we're good, we're not concerned about it, we have the ability to integrate that into our model without having to probably change too much up. And we know who those researchers are. But right now, we're basically just accelerating the processes that reefs, corals have the natural ability to adapt. It's just getting so bad so quickly they can't keep up. So we're just
tens of thousands of years from now, when humans have like left to space and we're all robots living around a Dyson sphere around some star, around the whole galactic center, the reefs will come back. It might take millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years, but like, why not try to save them now and enjoy them if we can?
Yeah, it's the adage, you plant trees for the shade for your grandkids. It's going to get worse before it gets better. But it's kind of like, I mentioned at the beginning of the call, my dad's work. I often describe myself as an optimistic realist, and he had to be when you're talking about making peace in the Middle East. You can't go into that type of job and just be a pure idealist, because it's gonna blow up in your face. You have to acknowledge the cultures, the history, the pain, all of these different things, the ego, and accept that and work with it. And you also can't be a cynic, because how can you ever make peace if you don't believe it's possible? And so we're faced real challenges and heartbreak and a lot when we're looking at a lot of these things, but with coral reefs dying, and also every reef we restore, every resilient coral we get out there, every 10th of a degree that gets averted makes a difference. And even if we won't see the fruits of our labors for generations to come, those generations hopefully will get to benefit and prosper.
Right. But it sounds like, within a year or two on a project,
you can see real stuff right away. Yeah.
You see some stuff right away. I mean, like almost overnight, you said, but also the reef starts healing itself. And so if I'm a hotel and I'm putting in, $1 billion hotel somewhere, I might as well spend a little bit of money to put a reef out in front.
100%. Yeah. Right. And that's the exciting thing for us also, is just to go back to your VC hat. So earlier this year, we raised a Series A investment round. It was, as far as I know, the world's first for a coral restoration company. It was led by Lucas Walton and Builders Vision. We're generating millions of dollars in revenue and seeing that pick up year on year, signing contracts from the Middle East to the Caribbean, public sector, private sector, tapping into conservation finance. The farms themselves, as we grow the corals and fulfill those contracts, are also tourism attractions. So people pay to visit the farm, like aquarium.
Farm tours, right? Yeah, because you probably have actual fish in the farms, I would imagine too, right?
Yeah, so it's like you can basically see a coral reef. You see us growing the corals, and then we also have these aquarium setups and touch tanks. It's just like if a distillery, right? They're making the whiskey and selling it, but the people are also paying to come to the tours. So we have that model too. So people coming from the hotels, from the cruise ships. We've got some award-winning farm experiences. And then we also do adopt a coral campaign. So whether it's the holidays and someone loves what we're doing, they can adopt an individual coral and get a digital certificate. We also have restored with brands, nature positive companies. We've restored a Corona beer reef. We worked with a Brazilian shoe company called Cariuma that did ocean-themed shoes, and money went towards restoration. So there's lots of ways in which we can generate revenue with direct restoration. We've also developed technology we use ourselves, but we license that tech out to other people in the space. The idea is, how can we generate the revenue needed to do large-scale impact? And we're seeing the fruits of our labor in the sea as well as on the balance sheet.
Yeah. So what's next? What's the 5-year vision? You've raised an A, and where do you want to be in 5 years?
Love to have operations in even more countries. So thus far, Bahamas, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, and the Dutch Caribbean island of Saba. We actually have a farm that's going to be opening up in Florida next year. The state of Florida gave us actually now 2 grants together with Florida Atlantic University to set up a facility in partnership with them. We're going to be doing a new project in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. We got pipeline from the Maldives to Barbados to elsewhere. And then the tech I briefly referenced there before, actually this year it was just recognized, it's called Brain Coral, as one of Time Magazine's best inventions of 2025. So we basically are using computer vision, AI, and staff tools to rapidly collect and analyze key data for how we can basically grow corals more effectively and cost effectively. So how can that tech not just be involved in our work, and it already is getting licensed out to other people, but basically underpin restoration all around the world. So from physical farms of our own to tech to partnerships, but really seeing sort of probably a Series B under our belt, but the proof points, the real work in the ocean and in the communities which we work, which is also a big part of our model through local hiring and workforce development and education. So there's the social impact side of what we do too. But yeah, in 5 years, I'd love to basically be at that point where we could take that springboard. And then, I mean, ultimately, I hope we're put out of business because reefs are fine. But every nation on Earth that has coral reefs can have large-scale land-based commercial coral farms, and we are doing the work that matters.
What about the really extremely long view? Like if you look out 20 or 30 years, imagine you've been working on this for the rest of your life and you're retiring. What are you proud of having accomplished? Imagining you do work on this exact problem for the next 30 years or whatever.
Sure. Yeah. It's always a fun question. Yeah. I mean, that basically we've proved that everything as far as our own impact in the reefs and also that the restoration economy and the ocean and ocean health is worth investing in. And it's not just us and Coral Vita that's successful and thriving, but there's been this roadmap for 1,000 other Coral Vitas and terrestrial and other marine ecosystems too, that people are putting money into this. We're investing in the ecosystems, in the local communities. It's showed that this is it's a win-win-win, because it is. I mean, again, if you can restore a reef that's a living seawall that protects your roads and homes from storms, it's also a tourism asset and boosts fish populations and is cheaper than the alternative. It's like, kind of why not? And, maybe we're also doing mangrove restoration and seagrass restoration, and the tech is just doing all sorts of amazing things. And we can bring in roboticists and all other, forms of people from across the spectrum, where it's not just the marine scientists and, the people who care and do good and love the reefs, but we're bringing in, coders and software engineers and, AI specialists and, systems thinkers and really creating this thriving system and restoration economy that takes care of the ecosystems that take care of us. And yeah, if that happens in 20 or 30 years, I would definitely say job well done.
Amazing vision. Yeah, I wish I would have met you in the seed. Although, I don't know, it's kind of off thesis, but anyway, very cool. It's very cool stuff.
It's what's been fun also about, we're definitely a different company. And we basically are building a market as we build a company, which has its challenges, but is also super exciting.
Yeah.
We've got traditional VCs on the cap table. We've got the Lucas Waltons of the world and family offices, a couple foundations who did PRIs, but we also have, angels, people that just love to scuba dive.
Yeah.
One of the cool investors I'll say is we have is Max and Erica Scherzer. And for those who aren't baseball fans, Max almost won the World Series again this year, but he's a future Hall of Fame pitcher. But he and Erica love to scuba dive, and that was enough for them to get involved. And so the idea is really anyone anywhere can kind of support this work.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, let's wrap up with some rapid fire questions. What's a belief that you hold now in restoration or nature tech that you think most people in climate investing will flip in the next 5 years?
Nature and biodiversity is investable and important in its own right, whether or not there is a carbon sequestration angle.
If you were to point to one unit economics or operational metric that everyone's evaluating your business should track, what would it be and why?
For us at Coral Vita, what's the cost per coral?
Yeah, cost per coral. Margin per coral, something like that. What's been the most surprising pivot or rethink you've had to do at Coral Vita?
With a lot of exciting opportunities now and a huge community involved in it, I was not expecting to make the jump from the Caribbean to the Middle East so quickly, but seeing those communities really stepping up and investing in coral restoration has been incredible.
They're investing a lot in infrastructure right now in the Middle East. Across the board.
And nature-based infrastructure, and not just in their own countries, but also supporting that work around the world. There's now a G-led initiative called CORDAP, which Saudi Arabia seeded the funding for, which is a $200 million instrument to fund open source R&D for coral and mangrove and other forms of restoration.
Who is a founder or a company at the intersection of nature tech and commercial scale that you admire and why? Besides yourself, of course.
Now, I got a lot of friends in this space. I'd say one at a big level would be Yvon Chouinard in Patagonia, showing how businesses can do good and do well, and also go outside of their own business and take care of nature. Another one would be Lisa Curtis, Kuli Foods. Take moringa, which is a superfood, work with Haitian smallholder farmers and women and make power bars and other foods out of them, and does agroforestry work and good social impact work. What's
a bottleneck outside of your company, global or regional, that if you unlocked it, it would lead to faster growth for you and faster reef restoration?
Education. We started off talking about the value of hotels and how it's a no-brainer for some people. I've had the hotel owners and managers who absolutely get it, and the hotel owners who've showed up in their $1,000 loafers on the beach and can't fathom that anything past the high tide mark matters for them. So again, educating people of influence in finance, in industry, in government, in the media, that it's not just a pretty rock, but it's the life pinning element for so many communities and the lifeblood of so many economies. Get through that roadblock, I think a lot will change quickly.
If you were a VC fund or an investor evaluating nature tech companies, what would you watch out for? What are some red flags or yellow flags?
Watch out for good and bad, or just the yellow and red flags?
Yeah, you could take them both. What's where to lean in and where to go, maybe lean out?
Well, I think the people always matter. Who are you working with? I think, what are the metrics they're evaluating things by, right? They're saying, look, we planted 100,000 trees or 10 million trees. That's great. But were they the right trees? How many of them survived? What other metrics did you measure as far as like biodiversity changes in that forest? Did you positively or did you negatively impact the local communities in those areas? So I think, having that second, third level beyond just patting ourselves on the back and saying, there's the headline story, but what was the real impact? I think is one of the most important questions that investors can dig into.
Yeah, and kind of circling back to previous answers, what's one thing you believe most clarity is missing on in the restoration economy today?
What's missing the most on clarity? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, what's not clear? What's a misconception you'd like to clear up, if you could?
I think this is any good project has to involve the local communities. They're going to succeed. They're much more likely to succeed. It's the right thing to do. There's knowledge that often these people have that far outweigh any just, tech, and not to mention like coming in on a white stallion and thinking you know the way without involving local people is critical. And I think too often that gets cast aside. So making sure that there's clarity around the people as much as the planet with the tech and the solutions is essential and always needs to be kept top of mind.
Yeah. Well, any final words and how can folks find you if they want to get involved? So
on social media, we're pretty standard at Coral Vita Reefs. Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, Twitter, www.coralvita.co, not .com. That's an Eastern European cosmetics manufacturer. Go figure. And I think, I would just say to everyone, get out in nature. Like, obviously, I hope you get the chance to see a reef, whether you dive or snorkel or get on a glass bottom boat. It's never too late to learn to do those things if you haven't. But also, if you're not able to get out there, go into the woods or on a hike or your local park. And I just think that not only is it just good for the soul, but I think the more time more people spend in nature, the more easeful it is to support the work to take care of it. And then recognizing, oh shit, we really do humanity relies on nature a lot more than nature relies on us. Everyone's welcome to come visit our coral farm, of course. And I hope you get the chance to family out and come plant some coral with us.
Thanks, Sam. I've really learned a lot. Thanks for doing what you do.
Appreciate it, Brian. Thanks for having me on. Thanks to everyone for listening.